Ladies and gentlemen, the microphones are on, the cameras are rolling. A special good evening for tonight's special city council meeting. I'm going to ask our deputy clerk, Ms. Fernari, I think most of you remember who she is, to please take the roll call.
Bowring. Here. Bruno.
Here.
Ruby. Here. Kilberg. Here. Kosarog.
Here.
Maladra.
Here.
Marks.
Here.
Mayor. Here. Paschke.
Here.
Swanson.
Here. This Wednesday, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Maladra celebrates a birthday, so there's no better time to invite him to lead us in the pledge than to do so tonight. We're not singing happy birthday.
Yeah.
Because I don't know who'd lead it.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And not too long ago, of course, Mr. Kosarog celebrated a milestone birthday. 30, yeah, very good, Mr. Very good, yes.
I'll take it.
Put it this way, he doesn't buy green bananas anymore. So we have one item tonight, folks, and that is item 1. Consider resolution number 2023-77, authorizing the city administrator to execute an emergency purchase of a pump and motor at a cost of $42,010. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Marks makes the motion. Alderperson Marks makes the motion. Alderperson Kosarog makes the second. City Administrator Dawkins.
Sure. So as we indicated in the packet, last week, well number 9 went into failure and would not restart. Electrical testing indicates that it was a failure of the motor. Well number 9 is our primary shallow well because of the raw water quality and production capacity. As you may remember, we have well number 6 and well number 13 are currently out of service, and therefore it's extremely important we get this one back in service as soon as possible to ensure we're able to meet the demand. The city code does empower the council to do an emergency purchase such as this, so that's why it's on the agenda this evening. But if you have any additional questions, we do have Superintendent Mangeskam with us this evening.
The floor is open for questions for either the superintendent or City Administrator Dawkins regarding this matter. Hearing none, sensing none, seeing none. We have a motion by Marks, a second by Kosarog. Madam Deputy Clerk, please take the roll.
Bowring. Aye. Bruno.
Aye.
Ruby.
Aye.
Kilberg.
Aye.
Kosarog.
Aye.
Maladra.
Aye.
Marks.
Aye.
Mayor. Aye. Paschke.
Aye.
Swanson.
Aye.
Resolution number 2023-77 has passed this special council meeting with a vote of 10 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 0 absent. Before we jump to public comment and new business, I just want to make sure that Alderperson Bowring is doing okay. Everything?
Sorry, yes, I'm fine. I expected it to lead with Marks this week.
Well, Fernari is new to this, so please forgive her.
My apologies.
No, we're teasing you. Public comment. Anyone with us this evening wish to address the council? To the dais, any new business anyone would like to share? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the special city council meeting.
So moved.
Alderperson Bowring, well played. All in favor of adjourning, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. We'll take a 1-hour break. Just a 1 minute to transition to the special committee of the whole. Ladies and gentlemen, I convene the special committee of the whole meeting for this evening. Let the record show that all the committee members are present. Items of business, item 2A, consider draft ordinance restating Title IX, Municipal Utilities, Chapter 2, Municipal Electric Service, Article B, Service Rates and Charges, Section 5, Table of Electric Rates of the Geneva City Code.
So moved.
Alderperson Bruno makes the motion enthusiastically,
Second.
seconded by Alderperson Mayor. Ms. Dawkins, do you wish to begin with anything, or we want to have our friends?
Go ahead and
Superintendent
turn it
Holton?
over to Superintendent. Thank you.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, everybody.
You want us to turn off this second light? So, oh, Marissa has it. Thank you very much.
Okay. So we're back here again after our meeting on July 3rd. Eric and I had some guidance on what the committee wanted to see, so we'll jump right into it here.
Superintendent, do you wish questions throughout, or you wish to?
I would, if we could hold questions till the end.
You got it.
That way we can kind of keep rolling, and then hopefully if we have a question, we answer it a little bit later on in the presentation.
Thank you.
So just a quick recap. On the July 3rd, we had a couple committee of the whole requests. One was the committee wanted to see the model rates with equal increased blocks in both residential and general service. We also modeled we looked at the model to try to find a rate with increasing percentage, percent increasing per kilowatt hour, if I said that right. And also we wanted to provide comparisons to other utilities. So the July 3rd rates that we presented was based on our feedback from the January meeting. And also, just want to reiterate that these capital investments will benefit the utility as a whole, not just certain rate segments or customer segments. That, as a business as a whole, these improvements will go a long way to assuring that we're financially sound moving into the future. And then just remind that everybody that we did have a bond resolution that passed in September of 2022. So with that, I will turn it over to Eric, and he can go through his presentations, and I have a few handouts here as well, so.
I'll let Aaron hand those out. Again, pleasure being here this evening. Thanks for inviting me back to visit about this and giving us an opportunity to jump into this a little bit after getting some guidance in the last meeting. Really, the objective tonight as we talk through the rates and the sensitivity analysis that were conducted to date is to feel from the council and the committee in terms of which direction you want us to go for final rates for both residential and general service. So as Aaron's handing those out, those will be important as we kind of step through this tonight. And as we go through this, I'll kind of provide some guidance on the different pages that are provided. I've got a copy of them here in front of me, so I'll reference those as we move forward as well. Do you need a couple copies, Aaron? Okay. There we go. All right, so at our last meeting, we talked about a few different things, specifically, impact of customer charge. So in this particular case, we looked at increasing the customer charge for beyond what was proposed for all customer classes. And what that will actually do is give us kind of a feel for the incremental change in the energy charge. So you can feel a direction either going up or down, what will happen with the proposed rates. Then we looked at uniform block step increase. As you may recall, the proposed rate that was presented back on July 3rd was actually increasing those block rates a little bit so that we could make sure that we're covering our fixed costs for customers, or more of the fixed costs for customers. And I'll talk about that in each individual rate. So you were looking at increasing the blocks equally for both residential and general service, and then also a blended energy charge and what that looks like. So I'd like to step through each of those with you and discuss the impact, and then we have some comparisons. And again, these sheets in front of you should kind of look familiar to what you've seen in the past, and I'll step through that for each one of these. So we'll start with residential. You've seen this slide before and what was proposed at the previous meeting. Again, I think the key here is kind of looking at that true customer charge of about $27 per customer per month is really the fixed cost on a per customer basis. And this particular rate class
adds up to about 26, a little over 26% of the total revenue for electric utility rates. One thing to note here is we do look at this rate class as a class. So we look at it in aggregate and look at overall what's the impact of the class and how do we make sure we're collecting revenue appropriately for the class. So the first thing I want to take a look at here is really, this was the proposed rate. You can see in the bottom table there, $8, a little over 13 cents per kilowatt hours for the first 500 kilowatt hours, and a little over 10 cents over 500 kilowatt hours. So you can see the impact as we increase the customer charge, and this would be reflective of any change. So you can kind of see a $1 incremental change. Ultimately, you're looking at 0.17 cents, 17/10 of a cent for a decrease in energy charge as you increase the customer charge. Ultimately, we're looking at collecting between $22 and $23 of fixed cost between the customer charge and that first 500 kilowatt hour energy block. And so the objective here again is to try and cover those fixed costs up front as much as possible so that it's equitable to everyone who's using the system. It costs $27 to get to every customer's location moving forward. So you can kind of get a feel for the impact of increasing a customer charge going from $8 to $10, and also inversely you can get a feel for what that would look like as you decrease the customer charge as well. So any questions on that? Just generally, this is what you'd seen in the past, and now we can kind of move on to what that looks like for the other potential rates in this area. What I will say is if you look at your packet under the residential rate and flip it up to the second page, you can kind of see the impact for each of these proposed customer charges at different usage levels. The next discussion point here is if we took the individual energy blocks and we increased them equally, so equal step changes for both the first 500 and over 500. And what you'll see is a little bit lower energy charge for the first 500. And the big thing here is if you look at it, you're collecting a significantly smaller amount of your fixed costs in that first 500 in the customer charge. So that customer charge, or those fixed costs, then get passed on to everything over 500 kilowatt hours, which again isn't a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination, but we're attempting to try and collect those as soon as possible so you make sure and recover your fixed costs associated with every customer on the system as quickly as possible. So what you're really seeing there is a higher over 500 kilowatt hour charge and a lower under 500 kilowatt hour charge, and you can see it when you look at the percentage increase across the usage levels on your sheet, which will be the next page that says uniform block step increase, you will see that you're seeing a more consistent increase across all the usage levels versus what was originally proposed. The next rate structure to look at is the blended energy charge. So you go away from a block rate and just say one fixed energy charge, which is another common approach that you see quite often for residential or single phase rates or general commercial rates. So again, we start off at about 12 cents per kilowatt hour energy charge overall, and for every dollar increase, you're reducing your energy charge by 1/1200th of a penny, basically. So pretty small decrease in energy charge, but you can kind of see what a blended rate looks like. And then if you look at the last page of that sheet that was provided, you can actually see that with the structural change from a block to a blended energy charge, you actually start to see an increase in percentage for higher usage customers. So the lower usage customers, 500 and below, are seeing a much lower rate increase than the higher usage customers, and that's just the nature of the way the rate is set up and changing that structure. Before I go on to general service, are there any questions, kind of looking at those? The last thing I'll draw your attention to is the very first page. There, you can actually compare at $8, at an $8 customer charge, kind of the differences between those three rate structures on the multiple structures sheet.
I do have a question.
Please.
Can you go back a slide?
Yes, ma'am.
So the second bullet point, collecting between 1462 and 1648. Where do those how do you get to those numbers?
So what that really, it's fairly straightforward in the fact that you take your customer charge plus the difference between the first 500 and over 500 times 500. So it's simply $8 plus the additional energy charge on that first 500 kilowatt hours, if that makes sense. So at 500 kilowatt hours, we collect an additional, for the $8, $14.62 versus everything beyond that.
Okay, so I see. If I took the 0.12565 minus the 0.11241 and then multiplied by 500.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
exactly.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for asking that, and that hopefully maybe answers that question for everyone else as well.
So how fast in here do we really get our fixed costs covered as we're doing this then? Does it take it, I mean, you said it's $27 really?
Correct.
Roughly, and here we're only at between 14 and 16.
Correct.
And that includes, I would imagine, the fixed customer charges in that, correct?
Correct, yeah, the $8 is in that. As you increase that customer charge, obviously, you're going from $14 to $16. The point here is that you're then spreading the remainder of that over all of the other kilowatt hours that you're selling on your system.
And doing that, is it possible then to fall short of covering that fixed cost?
On an individual customer basis, absolutely. On an overall system, the rates are really set up based on your historical sales and for the system and how that's broken out between 500 and over 500. So ultimately, that's part of the design process is we want to make sure that we cover all those costs. So your revenue, regardless of what rate structure and approach you're taking, it's revenue neutral, meaning that no matter what structure, you'll collect the right amount to cover the cost for that rate class. I'm just showing kind of the differences in how it affects individual customers in this particular
Well, what's
situation.
happening there then is the lower users are not covering their share of the fixed cost.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
And under which one of the scenarios does that work? That the lower, that everyone covers their fixed costs?
So under the
doesn't it
first
work anymore?
proposed option, you're going to get to the closest.
Okay.
You're never going to get 100%.
No, I didn't think you
And that's
would.
not the objective,
Okay.
but it's how do we make sure that we're collecting those fixed costs as soon as possible? And that was kind of our discussion in looking at this is that's an issue as you look at the system, making sure that you're covering those fixed costs as quickly as possible.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Just a small detail. So I know we talked a bit about the break at the 500 kilowatt hours. Did we consider just one rate instead of, we talked about what that break might be, but what if we got rid of the break and just did a flat rate for everybody, no matter what?
So that's exactly what the residential blended energy
Okay.
rate. So that would be those would be the energy rates if you had no blocks. It would be one to infinity. That's what you would be charging
Gotcha.
residents. And this isn't an uncommon rate at all. This is pretty common. And in fact, you see more and more utilities moving to just a flat energy charge across the board.
Okay. I think I prefer that, and I don't like the break for the over 500 because it just, to me, it seems like it's rewarding higher use. Which may not be a positive. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Understood. All right, I will continue on with general service. Again, just looking at this, so the true customer charge here is a bit higher just by the nature of the fact that we have fewer accounts, and also these accounts use more energy and oftentimes have a little bit more facilities required for them. You know, as we look at the system, we look at, okay, what does it take to get to this customer, and what are the administrative costs? So as the level of account goes up, your administrative costs and also the facility costs generally go up with those different customer accounts. So this is just a refresher on kind of where things stood with these particular customers. You know, as compared to residential, you only have about 1,400 accounts here, as compared to, oops, excuse me. Let me go up. Over 8,500 accounts for residential. So it's quite a bit smaller rate class, about 8% of your total revenue. So same discussion here. We looked at, okay, what's the impact of marginal impact of adding a $1 customer charge increase as compared to what we originally proposed. So we're trying to collect those fixed costs up front. So as proposed, if we look at that, you're collecting between $30 and $31 in fixed costs between the customer charge and the first 500 kilowatt hour energy block, and the marginal decrease as you add a $1 customer charge is 14/100ths of a penny. So not significant, but it does add up in that first block. The next one is if we increase the blocks uniformly, namely the percentage increase for the first 500 and the over 500 are the same. I forget what the percentage is for each block, but it's the exact same increase regardless of the customer charge. So you're seeing that increased percentage the same from the original current rate. And again, you'll see that we're collecting a bit lower in our fixed costs for that first 500 block, regardless of what your customer charge is. The higher the customer charge, the more you're collecting up front. And then the last one is the blended energy rate, which is where you get rid of the blocks completely and you spread your fixed costs beyond the customer charge across all kilowatt hours charged on the system. Again, none of these are out of the ordinary. It's just a question of which direction the committee wants to see us go with the rate study.
Alderperson Swanson.
Thank you. In the questions that were on the packet, one of the questions was, what are the proposed rate increases between residential and non-residential ratepayers? And we were provided four different categories. We were not provided general services or medium general services, and I wondered why that was, or can those be provided? And also, so that's question one. Question two, residential shows 9.88. How do I see the 9.88 on this sheet here?
So when we look at the increases, specifically rate increases, ultimately we're looking at, okay, we need to collect 9.88% more revenue for this rate class. So as you look at the rates, it's dependent on how much usage each customer has. So we try and show, hey, this is what a typical customer will see in their bill depending on their usage level as you look down that chart. All of these cases, so I'll go back to that the residential slide that we showed before in the previous example. So ultimately, we were looking to increase the revenue for the residential class by $904,850, which all of these scenarios that are provided to you tonight and accomplish approximately that, plus or minus, depending on rounding and everything else, right? So we're very close to that, or attempt to get very close to that with these different rate structures. So our objective is in revenue. Depending on the usage for each customer, their impact is going to be a little different, and that's what we're trying to show here. So if for residential rates, for example, if you look at the multiple structures $8 customer charge sheet, you can kind of see the impact at each usage level in their rate. 751 is highlighted because that is generally the average for the system, and you will see that that's higher than the 9.88%. But again, that has to do with the fact that we have customers using less than aren't covering their fixed costs, so that's what pushes those those average use customers up a little bit to cover the revenue that aren't collected with the lower use customers, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess I'm looking at the middle columns, which shows that the rate increase is 18.5% for zero usage to 11.9 for large use. All of those are above 9.88, so
Correct.
how do we get to 9.88 with all of those customers?
So as you look at your customers, there are some customers that use quite a bit more, and it just has to do with the fact that the lower use customers, despite the fact that they, let's take for example, if you're using $0, all you're seeing is the $1.25 increase in customer charge, which is equivalent to 18.5%. But that really doesn't cover the actual cost associated with that customer. And that's where as you move up the usage chart, you are having to cover those lower usage customers pieces that they aren't, the fixed costs that they aren't covering. So at the end of the day, the revenue is 9.88% increase, but individual customers may see something different than that.
Okay, I understand that. So I guess my other question then is the increase for general services and medium general services, do we know what that percentage is?
So the second sheet you've got, the second packet you've got is for general service.
Yep.
Medium general service, we didn't dive into too deeply, but that would have been the demand. That's a demand class. So we've provided that in the past presentation, which I can see here if I can find that. No, those aren't still in. That's okay. I don't have those slides up right now, but I could have pulled those up to show you kind of what that was in the past. From the past presentation on July 3rd, we did show medium general service in there as well.
Okay. I think that would be helpful since we're seeing 4 of the categories to see all 6, just so that we have the information.
There are graphs, kind of after Eric's presentation, that shows each one of the rate classes. So you can see that increase throughout the consumption.
So really the question we're looking for is, as you look at these different structures for specifically just the energy rates, what structure is the committee really interested in pursuing so that we can finalize our rate design and make a final recommendation for rates moving forward?
Alderperson Kosarog and Alderperson Bowring, but before I turn the floor over, define for everyone's benefit what general service means.
That's a great question. I'll let Aaron answer that question.
So general service is a commercial account that uses that does not meet a demand of 25 kW or more.
Oh, okay, so,
So your small businesses,
exactly.
okay?
Alderperson Kosarog?
I know we're trying to move forward, and my questions are a little bit backwards, but have we ruled out demand charges for residential customers? On demand, or time of day charges, sorry.
Not necessarily. I think the limitation is a technical limitation. I'll maybe turn that question to Aaron in terms of what your meters are capable of and what your billing system is capable of. We had discussed that we kind of looked at some demand rates in the past. I will tell you that from my experience, implementing a demand rate is several years out typically because you want to do a lot of education around that and provide your customers and your on your system with a lot of information on how demand rates work and what that means for them. So for example, I've seen other utilities actually put on an existing bill, okay, this is your bill today, but when we change to demand rates in a year to 2 years or whatever the case may be, this is what your bill would be so that they can see the comparison.
And is demand rate and time of day rate, are we same thing?
No, it isn't. Just to clarify, so a time of day rate, for example, you would say from the hours of 4 o'clock to 11 o'clock, your energy charge would be higher. It might be 16 cents. And then during the other hours, you might have an energy charge of 9 cents, right? So it typically is lower and there isn't a demand component. Then demand rates are simply, okay, what is your peak demand for your, in this case, for residential, your home? So maybe it's 5 to 3 to 5 for the month, and you would charge them on a monthly basis based on that peak demand. At the same time, their energy charge would go down quite a bit, probably in the neighborhood of, and I can't remember now off the top of my head what that was, but it was like 9 or 10 cents instead of the 13 or 16 cents that we're talking about.
Okay, so I think I was referring more, just for the record, time of day. Kind of discouraging it on our peak power days, right?
Right.
Yeah, so we presented those just for orientation purposes. I don't think we're ready to implement. We gave you 3 options, basically. We're not quite ready to implement those. We got to do some more research and some more modeling, and we'll bring those back at a later date. And also, our plan is those would be opt-in rates, not opt-out rates. So if somebody wanted to go on time of day or a demand rate, if we had it, they would choose to go on it. We wouldn't make everybody go on it and people opt out if they didn't want to be on it, so.
I was thinking more the second, more the latter, actually. But, okay, I mean, do our meters, are they capable of that? I mean, is there?
The current residential meters are not.
Are not.
That's something else we have to look at too.
And our-
What's that going to do to our fixed costs by putting these different, more expensive meters in?
And what about our billing software as far as that goes?
Again, that's another part of the research that we have to do.
Okay.
I would say the time of, hopefully Rita doesn't throw things at me. The time of day or time of use is not an unusual rate for residential, so I would hazard a guess that the billing software can probably handle it.
Okay. No major objection from Rita over there. I was looking at her afterwards. I do have another question. What about multiple blocks instead of, would you say we're proposing on the block model, the two blocks, right? So what about 3 blocks, maybe over 1,000 kilowatt hours? Would that be a viable option? Or, I'm pretty sure that's done elsewhere. So I guess maybe the general question is why you didn't propose that one here. It feels like, if I could just give a little more preface, that could be more equitable, where the people in the middle and the under are picking up more of the, are picking up less of the cost, where if you're over 1,000 or whatever that third block might be, those are the people that really maybe should be picking up the bulk of, the, whatever's left over, the fixed cost, yeah.
So I think, as we talked about the rates and we started working on this process, generally we weren't diving too deeply into a major structural change, partially because we recognize that we're proposing a significant increase across the system just due to the revenue requirements. And so typically you look at major structural changes to rates when you don't have a significant increase or some intermediary point, because it does have an impact on individual customers' rates, right? If we make a structural change to the rate. Ultimately, I've seen situations where you have three, sometimes even 4 blocks. It's kind of rare today. We've seen more of it going actually towards a blended energy rate, where you just have a simple flat energy rate than adding more blocks, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Again,
There are strategies there that we can look at to collecting those fixed charges at different points. Typically, it's a descending block. So, the first block is the highest, the middle block is the second, and then the third block is the lowest, because you've collected all your fixed charges and a lot of your demand costs up front. And that's the objective of those. That's why those were created initially, versus just blending it across every single kilowatt hour. But
Okay.
that,
No, I totally understand.
yep,
Thank you very much.
no problem.
Alderperson Bowring.
Thank you. So I have a few questions. Some of the questions so first of all, I wanted to ask, are we at the end of your presentation? I know Aaron had initially asked that we wait till the end. I was trying to, I don't know if I'm anticipating
Eric
something
seems
that's going to
solicitous of
come.
questions throughout, so I
Yeah,
defer
I
to
did.
the
I
speaker.
apologize. I
that's
just
okay.
wanted
That's
to
okay.
give people the opportunity since we were diving into
If
it.
you'd like, I can go through, my part of the presentation is just kind of the graphs comparing the rates.
I'd be happy to save my questions to the end. Possibly they'll be addressed, but yeah. So if you want to continue, please go ahead.
Yeah, let me, okay, so, I was asked for a rate comparison. Rather than give you just a table of numbers, which is kind of hard to interpret. Came up with a graph that compares, you can see Batavia, ComEd, Geneva, Naperville, Rochelle, St. Charles, and then the customer choice is a customer on ComEd who chooses their power supplier from a third party. Geneva is highlighted in red. This is the July 3rd proposal versus our neighbors' current rates. And you can see the progression. Geneva typically is the, I don't have my mouse. Geneva typically is about the lowest. There's some blocks there that we're not. But on this rate, we typically have the lowest energy rate amongst the Fox Valley municipalities.
Aaron, real quick.
Sure.
Is this the proposed or the current? Just
This
to
is
make
the
sure I'm clear on
proposed.
that. Okay.
All these graphs are the proposed rates, not the current
you.
rate. This is the uniform increase, so both blocks get the same percentage of increase. You can see that that moves us up there. We're no longer the least expensive. We're not the most expensive either. And you can see that rate increase is pretty linear there. There's not a big jump anywhere. And finally, this is the blended rate. So we start out these lower blocks. We were less expensive, up to about $750, $1,000, and then at $1,250, we kind of take over from Batavia and have the highest energy rate, except for ComEd. Both ComEd customers are still in higher than we are. So-
Aaron, I can't differentiate between the two greens, the Naperville and the Rochelle green.
Yeah,
Is
it's
Rochelle
kind
the
of, it's
lowest?
washed out it's washed out there on the
It's Naperville that's the
projectors.
lowest, or is it Rochelle?
I believe it is Naperville is the
Okay.
lowest.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead there. Again, for the general service, this is the July 3rd proposal. There's a couple spots where we're a little bit more expensive, but as it progresses up, other than St. Charles, we're the least expensive for general service. On the uniform increase, kind of the same story. And then finally, the blended. On the blended general service, we kind of stay middle of the pack on that one as the amount of consumption goes up. And then here is the medium general service. The numbers in the squares are the demand. This one down here got blocked out. It's actually a 25 kW demand. This is the total bill as well. So when you get into the demand rates, it's if you remember, it's a little different. So there's a demand charge, and that's $1 per kW, which is the highest interval usage throughout the month. So the highest half-hour usage during the month is what this customer pays for demand. And then there's an energy charge, and the energy charge tends to be relatively inexpensive when you're trying to compare it between the general service and medium general service. But you can see a customer that breaks into that. Go back here real quick. We'll just go back one slide. So at 3,000 kW or kilowatt hours, general service customer on the blended rate has a bill that's about $400. And we don't quite go down to 3,000, but at 5,000, their bill is closer to about $1,000. So there's a pretty good jump for moving into that medium general service. And then you can see the increases as the demand gets higher. And medium general service covers between 25 kW and 400 kW as well. So a large general service, that's 400 kW to 2,000 kW, so we're kind of moving out of the small business type into the larger, like light manufacturing, somebody with, a rather large facility that has good electric load. Again, these are the different demand rates, or the demand levels, so 400, 500, 600, and 750. Again, you can see that we're about middle of the pack on these. We're well below ComEd, which is a selling point for getting people to relocate to Geneva for their businesses. And the final one is large industrial time of day. We do have 2 large industrial straight, not straight, 2 large industrials that are not time of day. So they're on they just pay a single energy charge for the energy they use. The time of day one actually has, they pay more during the peak times, less during the off-peak times. And so you can see the different blocks here, so 2,000, 5,000, 7,000, and 10,000. And again, we're towards the bottom, depending on what demand level, but competitive with the other municipalities. Okay, so that's the end of my graphs, so we can resume with the questions.
Questioning resumed. Alderperson Bowring, do you wish to?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I thought I understood this, and then as we kept talking, I would like some clarification on the difference between uniform block step and blended energy. So uniform block step is just a flat percentage increase.
For each block. So when we proposed this, we saw a block, if you look at the original proposal, which will be your second page there, we increased that first block quite a bit more than we increased the second block in order to cover additional fixed cost. So if you compare the present rate to the initial proposed rate, the first block went up quite a bit more than the second block did.
By first block, you mean under 500 kilowatt
Yep,
hours?
thank you,
and
yeah,
over
under 500
over
KW went
500
up quite a bit
kilowatt
more than the over 500 KW. And that was,
Right.
again, by design, the attempt was to cover more fixed costs in that first block, since we have a block rate. If you look at the uniform block step increase, what that is both the first 500 and the over 500 increased percentage-wise the same amount. So if it went up by 10% in the first block, the second block also went up by 10%.
I see. So we're making sure the percentage increase is the same, and blended energy is, we're charging the same rate across all of the blocks.
Correct.
But the percentage, okay, shakes out differently.
Yep.
Another question is, so if we're getting to the 9.8% increase that Alderperson Swanson was asking about, the way we get there is basically that if this table were to continue past 3,000 kilowatt hours, those rates just keep going down sufficiently that eventually the average is 9.8?
Correct.
Is there a reason we cut it off at 3,000? Is that significant?
Not necessarily. This is just for demonstration. I mean, ultimately, you don't have a lot of residential customers that go over 3,000.
But we have enough that it brings the overall rate down to 9.8%?
Actually, the bigger issue is on the other end, where you have enough under in the lower usage amounts that causes those upper rates to still be higher to cover the additional fixed cost, if that makes sense. So
Nope, sorry, I didn't follow that. Could you
So
try
there are
again?
enough customers at the lower rates that aren't using 500 or less and aren't covering those fixed costs that the other customers have to bear those additional costs.
Okay, well, so that leads into my next question. How many is this something that we know? How many customers, so looking at residential, how many customers' usage falls below like a break-even point? I know that the average consumption is 780 or 750, which is more or less highlighted for us. So half below, half above, but yeah.
I don't know that I have the answer for that offhand. I can get you that answer, though.
Okay. Okay, I think that's all my questions for right now. Thank you.
Alderperson Maladra?
Thanks. So to me, a lot of this problem settles on the matter of fixed costs. So a question for you guys, how much fixed cost is there regardless of level of consumption? So if we found ways to reduce consumption throughout the city by whatever, 50%, how much of our fixed cost would remain?
Well, and that's kind of the risk with, for example, a blended cost where we're assuming that based on a test case year, which was 2022, we looked at a test case of, okay, this is what your typical consumption for this particular class is. And we look at that moving forward and say, all right, well, if that's the case moving forward, here's how much you have to collect per kilowatt hour. If consumption goes down pretty dramatically, you will, I can't tell you on a percentage basis, but you will potentially fall short to cover your fixed costs.
Also, stop, I'll interrupt you right there. So basically what I'm asking is what goes into fixed costs, right? So my impression, and you guys, they're all used to me being an idiot, so this is fine. But my impression is it's the stuff that's required to get power to our door, regardless of source, regardless of how much power. And so to me, that's the same whether you're consuming 1 kilowatt hour or 1,000 kilowatt hours.
Correct.
Is that a correct, close enough?
Yes, that's
Am I
correct.
less
That's
of an
how we,
idiot than usual?
that's how we think about fixed costs. It's, you have X number of employees, no matter how many kilowatt hours you sell, you have to pay those employees. Same for equipment, same for facilities.
Right.
So those are your fixed costs. Your marginal costs, then follow that with how much usage, which also has, if you're not selling that, you're also not having to buy it, right? So then your overall costs go down, but still your fixed costs remain that you have X number of employees, X number of vehicles, X number of
Okay.
facilities. That have
So to
go
me,
on.
that becomes important because everything else that we're talking about is different ways of capturing or attempting to capture that fixed cost. And so we're left with the question of how much, we talk about wanting to capture them as early as possible, and how much does it weaken the utility if we are late in capturing that or something along those lines. Now, when you show all these different comparisons, I guess it's relatively interesting, but with a focus on fixed cost, so I took a look and I looked at Batavia, St. Charles, Naperville, and I'm seeing monthly customer charges, $14, $17.75, and $16.50. And we're kind of bending over backwards trying to find ways to avoid or to squeeze $8 and figure out how to capture the rest through usage. Do we know, like if they charge $17, is it because they have twice as much fixed cost as we do? Is it basically our 8 only covering a larger utility? Or are they capturing their fixed costs earlier than we are?
I believe that's just a philosophy of the utility and the various city councils in those other cities. They've decided to take that tack of collecting more of it in the fixed cost, less of it on the energy side. Geneva, years ago, decided that's not how Geneva wanted to do
yeah, I
that.
understand
And
that.
so that's kind of where we find ourselves today.
Right.
So.
I get that. So when we talk about different things, I kind of am sort of partial to getting rid of the blocks. Batavia, only St. Charles, at least of the ones I looked at, St. Charles has blocks. But Batavia and Naperville do not. But all that does is make it simpler for us to explain what we're doing.
That's fair.
In terms of capturing our fixed costs, we still have to figure out how much are we going to capture sooner rather than later. When we talk about inverting it so that we're charging a higher rate for the people who consume more, I don't know, when you borrow money and you're paying on a mortgage or a car loan, the early payments are all the bank's interest. You're not paying your principal for a long time because the bank is recapturing, what's theirs earlier. When I was trying to run numbers and saying, okay, so if residential customers owe me $27 a month, and I've got 8,000 of them, and you figure out what that amounts to in a month, charging the lower rate to the lower users, I'm not getting to my $27 like ever. So I think what we're doing, the way that we have it structured now, is we're attempting as best we can to capture as much of that fixed cost as early as we want to, or as early as we possibly can, which makes sense to me. I know that it's difficult and it's sort of distasteful, but I don't believe that we're discouraging conservation, because the same fixed cost is required whether you use 1 kilowatt hour or 1,000 kilowatt hours. What we're trying to do is figure out how to cover our fixed costs as early as possible. And that's just what I'd kind of like everybody to keep in mind. It's not about, the way we've structured the rates is not about encouraging or discouraging a certain amount of usage. It's about capturing a cost that's going to be the same no matter how much you consume. Thanks.
Before I recognize Alderperson Bowering a second time, anyone else wish to speak? Alderperson Bowering?
Thank you. So I hear what you're saying, Alderperson Maladra. I don't think that any of these scenarios, though, propose that the utility is not going to, as we expect, meet its fixed costs. I mean, as I understand it, all of these are viable scenarios.
Correct.
Right. So I know that Alderperson Kosarog suggested, I think at the beginning of the discussion, what would happen, as you were saying, if we tried to further incentivize conservation by actually increasing the marginal cost for higher usage. None of these, if I'm not mistaken, actually do that, right? Do any of them?
Technically, no, none of them increase the cost for usage. So like if we don't have an increasing block, I have not, in my career, I have not seen that.
Right. I guess I do want to point out that while I'm not interested in making our utility insolvent, we are, we have fiduciary responsibility, I think, to the utility and to all of our customers, residential and commercial, industrial, et cetera. But I think it's oversimplifying things a bit to say that we don't have any part to play in conservation. Now, I think there is potentially as much, if not more, gain to be had in some of the future rate structures that were brought up last time and that we touched on today. However, to me, it does seem significant if we're looking at this to try to limit the regressivity of it. And as I think you and Alderperson Bruno pointed out at our first discussion, the more we increase the fixed charge that we're passing on to customers, actually the more aggressive it is. So I, for one, appreciate that we're trying to limit that, that we're going up gradually. And I guess, I think it's a big consideration for me that, that we be mindful of both trying to make sure that this does not have a disproportionate impact on people who have less financial means, who, as was also pointed out at our first discussion, often don't have as much control over the energy efficiency of their residences, their appliances, et cetera. So that might mean they're in the lowest category. It might mean they're over 500 or over 780. It's interesting looking through my bills and seeing what my 150-year-old house with very poor insulation does in terms of energy costs on during a hot period. So that being said, I think it's perhaps a bit oversimplifying to say that the only thing that we're doing here is making sure that we make back our fixed costs. That is definitely, I think, an important concern, but I think it's pretty important how we arrive there and thinking about, well, yeah, are we asking people who are consuming 3,000 kilowatt hours or more to actually, make less of a jump than someone who is our average customer? And again, I tried to get a little more firm data on what our typical residential customer looks like. I feel like in the industrial categories, there's a lot of variability. And anyway, so yeah, so that's my perspective on a lot of this. And I guess I'm still kind of parsing the pros and cons of uniform versus blended. And I'd love to hear perspectives from other members of the committee. Thank you.
Alderperson Ruby, then Alderperson Mayor.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Can someone shed light on the history of the reasoning for the low base rate that the council decided on? Like when that happened and what the rationale was?
To be honest with you, that's lost to history. I did some research after our last meeting. I went back, I found a resolution in 1987 that had this similar rate structure. I could not find anything beyond that. The records get a little iffy beyond that. So this type of low base rate, recover it in the first 500 kW block, has been around since at least the mid-1980s. So I'm not real sure why the decision was made back then to
If I may,
Take this.
Superintendent, and perhaps for Alderperson Ruby's benefit and everyone else's, for those of us who have been around a while, meaning our age, and I think the superintendent knows this as well, I believe Mr. Kilberg might, for years, we had a contract with Wisconsin Energy. And Wisconsin Energy's first foray into the state of Illinois was the city of Geneva. And they provided us a contract that people would have died for. We received energy so inexpensively that it was almost a gift. When that expired in the late 80s, early 90s, that's when it was the now what do we do kind of scenario. I think that has something to do with the historic nature of it as well, but for what it's worth in terms of historical perspective.
So just with that, I feel that maybe it's time to take a look at that aspect of this with what has been shared about why things are how they are. And we haven't touched on that. That's a whole nother can of worms, sorry. But it seems like a overdue conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderperson Mayor.
So, I'm looking at the two tables. One is on page 4 and the other is on page 2 of tonight's packet for residential. And kind of in line with Alderperson Bowring's comments, I believe at one point you said the average was 750 kilowatt hours for our users. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So, putting that in the middle and then going up 2 steps and going down 2 steps, or vice versa, in this table. So, minimum user 250 kilowatt hours. I think probably 99% of our users use 250 kilowatt hours, or at
We'll
least
say
at the minimum?
90.
90?
90.
Okay. And then 1,250 might be an equal swing on the other side, maybe-ish.
Rita, do you have any feel for that?
If you do, join us at the podium. If you don't, enjoy the view.
Hard part is usages all over the board. It's very hard to kind of, we did that average saying, okay, that's what we think the average is. We do have a lot of people that are far under 500, but then I know the addresses that are 3,000, so it's kind of.
But it's not 10% under 250 and 10% over 1,250-ish?
I don't know. I'd have to
Okay.
actually graph that out to see where it would fall.
Well, just taking that as like looking at the actual amounts of the bills in each case, because let's say that is kind of the bulk of our use group, then the sensitivity analysis initial proposed rate for an $8 a month charge shows that we're $40.65 for 250 kilowatt hours and $99 for the 750 and $150 for 1250. And then if I look at the blended energy rate, which I think is appealing to a lot of people here to just give us one rate, number one, the people that are at $3,000 are kind of, or 3,000 kilowatt hours are kind of getting burned with this change. It goes up, their bill goes up quite a bit, but the percentage increase is more even across the board. So hopefully I'm not losing everybody here, but on the blended rate, we're at $157 for 1250, 98 for 750, so that's pretty negligible difference between the initial proposed rate, and then $40 versus $38. Really, the main difference ends up bringing the people, the residential users that are high users, evening out the increase to them as a percentage basis has the most impact, is the most impactful thing that we're going to do here. Everything else is dollars, small dollar changes in
Correct.
people's bills.
Correct. I mean, overall, everyone's going to see, and that's kind of the key point too, is everyone's going to see an increase. But with a structural change, you will see, as you can see on the blended energy rate, you're right. Those larger users feel that a lot more because they were regressing down towards a lower
Right.
amount per kilowatt hour. Whereas now it's going to be the same no matter how many kilowatt hours they had, because they had a step down in cost once they got over 500.
Right. So, I mean, I personally think that spreading that amount of change that we need to make the utility meet its costs across all payers equally is captured best in the blended energy charge. Does that jive with what you would?
I would say that particular structure is not uncommon at all, and we see a lot of people moving towards that and getting out of the block, partially because it's harder to explain and historically, is a historical type of approach. What I will say is that, you will, for those customers at the kind of that break-even point that we were kind of talking about,
750.
yeah, we'll say 750. For those and below, you're definitely not collecting your fixed cost. It's not an inappropriate approach, and structurally is pretty consistent with what you're seeing at other places. But you're spreading your fixed cost across every kilowatt hour for sure. Then, and require to have those larger use customers make sure they use that much, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Alderperson Mayor, anything else? Alderperson Patchke, then Alderperson Bowering, unless there's someone else who has not yet spoken and wishes to do so. That'll be Bruno, then it'll be Bruno, then it'll be Bowering, then it'll be Kosrad.
So I understand what you're saying about risking not collecting the fixed costs from those lower segments there. And I understand, in regards to Alderperson Maladra's comments before, the idea of being fair in how we collect from everybody equally. But I think there's plenty of precedent in public services and public goods that shows us that that's not necessarily how things are done. We know that our taxes fund our schools. Some people are paying a lot more than other people, and our kids all get the same education. That's one example. So I don't think it's unreasonable to look at the structure and say this is a good way to do something in our community. So I would agree. I think the blended energy charge does a better job of distributing the cost, and we know that it should come close, and we can always review it later. I guess one question would be, if we're looking at these different models, do we need to settle on one model for across the board? I would assume so, because that would get very messy, but
Right.
just for clarity's sake.
So again, it kind of goes back to looking at your customers in classes, right, and how we define those classes. So Aaron described the general service before. For residential, it's single phase home use. I don't know if there's a demand component to that rate class at all, or if it's just defined as residential.
Just residential.
Just as residential. So you look at all residents the same, and you tend not to break those into separate classes. So that's how we set this up in our model to make sure that we're looking at it across the board.
I meant between residential, general service, medium, are we, like, if
So-
we decide we like blended, we would do blended across all of those?
Right, you don't have to. You certainly can. Once you get above general service, then you're in a demand rate and you have a single energy charge already
Okay,
for all those other customers.
thank you.
Alderperson Bruno, then Bowring, then Kosarog.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been quiet because this is always challenging. And Alderperson Maladra seems to think he sounds like an idiot sometimes, but I followed everything he said. I will set the bar for what might sound like idiocy. I'm getting more sense that we are favoring a blended rate. It's just in my heart of hearts, it just feels right. The problem with that is the sensitivity to the trend of reduced usage over time. There's a regressiveness with higher, according to the box I'm looking at, the higher fixed customer charge there. If, as long as we stay competitive, if people are really concerned with regressive rates, this idea keeps popping into my head, is to some sort of a prebate. Everyone pays the same, but we define somehow, whether it's through usage, it's probably not realistic to do income qualified prebate for this, but everyone also gets a fixed rebate on their bill, which pushes the fixed charges. We increase those fixed charges to those higher usage people. But again, the idea that those that might be of reduced means have less efficient appliances. So now I can stop thinking about it. Probably idiocy, but I've said my piece. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Alderperson Bowring, then Kosarog.
I just wanted to make a very small note. Something that kept confusing me is that part of the line on page 4 of the residential rate. Not sure if it's true on the other one. Yeah, the blended energy charge, it also says uniform block step increase at the top of each column, and I was feeling like I was missing something, but that's it. Thank you. Can go on
Thanks
to
for pointing
Kosarog.
that out. That's incorrect. You're right.
Way to go, Eric.
I know.
Alderman
You caught me.
Kosarog.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess one thing you said earlier kind of took me off. I just wanted to ask you or Aaron's opinion about this. What is, in terms of the overall utility, what's the least risky option for the solvency of the utility in the long term?
It would be the proposed block rate, which is why we are going that direction to collect the most fixed charges up front. Again, I go back to, all of these options are perfectly plausible. I don't have a strong recommendation other than to get your feedback on each one of these. So I'm just trying to provide, like I said, you're going to collect the most fixed cost up front with the proposed block rate that was originally proposed on July 3rd and kind of what's shown in here. And then as you change down to the uniform rate, uniform energy charge across to all kilowatt hours, that's probably the most risky. That being said, it's pretty marginal here because this is a very common approach. It's not unusual at all. So any of these are perfectly viable options.
So that's not a real factor in which one we might choose to go on.
No, I would say that that would not be a decision maker. I'm just trying to provide the facts and how would you collect your revenue over each of these rates.
Thank you.
Yep.
Alderperson Marks.
Could we go back to the chart that just shows the blended rate and how we compare to the, I just want to make sure with the blended rate, we weren't getting way, we get a little higher in there, don't we?
Yeah, so what you are seeing is those lower cost customers, 750 and below, 500 and below, we stay lower than everybody else, but then it increases as we move up. And again, that just has to do with the fact that you're now charging more for everything over 500 from there on.
And normally, we've always tried to be one of the lower rates, and my only other concern, and that's one of the concerns with the blended rate, but the second one is, I would think that those people that are in a higher usage have more of the ability to go out and get a lot more efficient equipment too.
Potentially.
If you're using 3,000 kilowatts, and you probably got the ability to go out and update, your air conditioning furnaces and washers and dryers a lot quicker.
If it makes an impact, if they can save money on their utility bill, certainly that would.
They will do that, and
That would.
And that's good. That's a good thing. I'm not saying that, but that then would not put us at much risk.
Correct.
It would not. Okay.
Yeah, you would lower your usage as well.
Yeah, the only reason I'm concerned with the blended rate is, we've always tried to stay below our neighbors and so that it's a selling point realistically for our residents. And with the blended rate, we're kind of hurting ourselves doing that. And that's been discussions before.
One thing I do want to point out too is when we're looking at this right now, we're looking at kind of an 8-year plan here. And this rate is 8 years out from now. And we're proposing a stepped increase from now. So next year, we're looking at more of like a 3% increase in rates for residential, not the full 9.8%.
So they're going to be increasing along the way probably too.
Yes, and the question also remains is what your sales look like with the added infrastructure to support commercial in town. So there's a little bit of this that is academic because we're trying to make sure that if nothing happens with any of the improvements on the system and we don't see any benefit from that, this is what we could be facing. That being said, as we talked about on July 3rd, if a lot of that comes to fruition, we start to see it, that's a point where you look at, okay, how has the calculus changed especially for your large commercial and commercial customers, and how does that support the system as a whole? So there's a chance that this gets pushed off further, but we want to show kind of the worst case scenario. If you were to implement what we think we need 8 years from now today, this is what it would look like, yeah.
Does the blended rate cause us any issues if we really want to start increasing, like Alderman Ruby had mentioned, increasing that fixed cost per month? Does the blended rate cause us any issues with that? No.
Absolutely not. No, you can.
Just wanted to verify. I didn't think so, but I just wanted to check that. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kilberg has not yet spoken. Alderperson Kilberg, then Swanson.
Yes.
Excuse me, do you still have the floor?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't
Okay,
realize.
and then
Aaron.
Alderperson Brewer.
At this point, if someone's watching, they might have the question, well, the additional revenue that we're generating, what are the system improvements? Could you give us a brief overview of what those system improvements are and what, where the need is as it relates to the additional revenue?
Sure. So what originally kicked all this off was the needed capital improvements to serve the load out on the east side, the growing load out on the east side. We're basically full on our transformer capacity. We can't tolerate much more growth with facilities that are out there. So we have to build additional substations. We have to put additional wire in the ground to be able to get the power out to these different developments. So that's what originally started the process going for the rate increase.
Good. Second question. We're talking about fixed costs, and we're looking at the next 8 years, roughly. What are some of the potential variable costs that could impact our models in a dramatic way?
So the largest part of our budget is power supply. We have long-term and midterm contracts that kind of cover our current loads. Depending on how these loads develop, what kind of load profiles they have, we might be looking at having to go out and procure more energy. So that could be an expense that we have to cover. The other probably bigger issue, or the second biggest issue besides power supply, is just material costs and inflation. Everything's going up astronomically. A transformer that used to cost $40,000 is $140,000 today. So we have those kind of cost pressures as well that we're going to have to take into consideration.
So how would we go about rectifying that if we saw a dramatic increase in our energy costs, or if we saw a huge escalation in costs as it relates to our variable needs with some of the improvements that we're talking about?
So our energy costs are direct pass-through. So if our energy costs go up, that goes directly through to the customers. As far as the expense costs like materials and whatnot, we'll have to keep an eye on our margins. If our margins start to slip because it's costing us more, then in the next phase of our rate increase, we're going to have to take that into consideration.
And as far as the phases, if we approve a rate increase, what do you think the duration of that first phase might be? 2 or 3 years?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years. So we'll do a rate increase now, we'll wait 2 years, do another rate increase, wait another 2 years, do a third rate increase.
Good, that's all I had, thank you.
Alderperson Swanson, then Alderperson Bruno.
Thank you. The question came up whether or not Geneva is lowest on the chart that is up there. But my understanding of what we're doing here is we're smoothing the same increase to various customer accounts in the aggregate.
Right.
So we're just looking at little cuts of the same increase. So
Exactly.
I don't think we ever said we're going to be the lowest in every category. You kind of have to look at it overall, if that's, my understanding is correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then tying into what Alderperson Kilberg mentioned was what if in the future we have additional expenses. I think I sense a lot of alderpersons being concerned that if we're putting fixed cost reimbursement in variable costs, are we at risk for not being able to recoup fixed costs in the future? However, would we not address that if we saw that happening? If variable consumption was dropping by 50%, would we not call a special meeting 2 years from now and say, we've got to do something?
Yeah.
We wouldn't ever let it go and not recoup fixed costs.
Right, so we have the 90-day reserve requirement set by the city council, and that's really our barometer. So if we saw our margins quickly heading below that 90 days, that would be our trigger to have to do something about it. As far as projecting expenses, we do have a capital improvement plan. That's probably the largest capital expense we have. And, we project out 5 to 10 years on our capital projects. So, and that's built into this model. So we're trying to roll those anticipated expenses into this model so we don't get into a situation where all of a sudden, we're dropping below the 90-day reserve and accelerating.
Okay. So I guess overall, I look at what we're proposing here, and I like the non-regressive nature of smoothing it to everyone, and we're spreading the pain, if you will, that everyone's going up an equal amount. So I'm comfortable with that. Thank you.
Alderperson Bruno, then Alderperson Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. It was brought up last time, and one of you kind of alluded to it. We are pricing this to cover improvements for development that will increase consumption when tenants appear. That space out there at Southeast Master Plan, that can vary a lot, I imagine, depending on what type of tenants go in there. But if we had high usage tenants go into those spaces, that's going to spread some of that out. We'd be able to readjust that down if I don't know if we've got a sense, maybe it'd be Kathleen who's not here, that if we have any sense as to what types of tenants have been showing interest, whether we've got high usage, data farms or something. But just for the viewing public, once this all comes online, there's going to be very potentially having some tenants to significantly share the electric burden.
Yes.
Thanks.
Alderperson Mayor?
I can. That one?
Yeah. Actually, I have no question on this. I just wanted to see
You just
the
wanted
other
to see the
slide.
So dramatic, I love this.
I put a lot of effort in that slide. I'm glad somebody wants
We
to
were
see
all
it.
leaning forward like, you were being tested there, Holden. The dais is open. Alderperson Patchke.
This relates to the next agenda item, but kind of ties in. And my question would be, would switching from the net metering to avoided cost have any impact on the proposed residential rates
Not in this model. It does not,
in any of the models?
in any of the models.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Belated birthday boy.
Thanks.
Alderperson Kosorog.
I guess I just, for anybody watching or anything like that, we're a nonprofit utility. So when we talk about margins, profitability, things like that, we're not talking about literally making money maybe to pay for other programs in the city. We're talking about all this money stays in the utility, and should there be any extra, or should there, it go the other way, it'll all, in the end, work out. So I don't know if you can speak to that at all, or how that compares to our neighboring utilities, but I think that's something important to know in general, that we're not a for-profit. We're not making money off of any of
Right,
this.
we're not, the ComEds of the world have got a return on investment. They have investors to, that they need to return that profit to their investors. We do not have that.
Great. I just thought that was an important point of clarification. Thank you.
Alderperson Bowering.
So I guess is it appropriate to kind of take the temperature of the council? We've heard certainly a number of people, myself included, liking the blended rate. Is it appropriate to make a motion, or should we take a?
Well, we have a motion on the floor to
Okay.
consider the draft ordinance restating Title IX, which was presented.
Which was the initial proposed rate, or, so we
Yes,
would amend
yes.
it?
It was, exactly.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion to substitute the blended energy charge rate for the initial proposed rate in the draft
To be
ordinance.
fair, Alderperson Bowering requests via the motion that we focus on the blended energy rate model. Eric, do you want to say something before we ask for a second? Is it germane to this?
Can I confirm if that's for both residential and general service?
That's for all, quote, blocks, as it were?
Yes, so for all blocks, my understanding is that the higher industrial ones have, their demand, time of day, it's a
Yeah, they
different,
don't have
yep,
one. Thank you.
So that includes residential and general services.
correct.
Can we-
Alderperson Bowering's, or is there clarification
A
required?
clarification request. There's several different per month charges on the tables. Are we thinking the $8 per month?
Yes, I'm thinking the $8 per month charge.
Here we go. The motion includes the $8 a month charge. Is there a second to Alderperson Bowering's motion?
Second.
Seconded by Alderperson Bruno. Now, that amendment is on the floor, ladies and gentlemen. We can debate that amendment. To pass that amendment requires a simple majority of this august body. Alderperson Swanson.
Thank you. Question, why this information that we received tonight wasn't in the packet? And could the residents have had this information available to them to study so that they would be familiar with it and could give us input?
To be honest with you, this is the first rate increase I've gone through. Typically, when we discuss rates and monetary, we hold that until we give the presentation. Then the presentation's available for public comment afterwards. So I just kind of followed that paradigm.
Okay, I think it would have been more appropriate to have all this information available to review prior to being handed to it, and now we're voting on it. I suppose it's not going to be enacted until the next
Right,
meeting,
so-
so there is time for people to review. I guess I'm also stating, anytime we have presentations like this with a lot of data, I think to have it in advance would be helpful.
And this is a balance that we have this conversation every time, because I think there's the balance between providing all the data with no interpretation, with no explanation, that causes more confusion than waiting and presenting it. We post it to the website the next morning, it's out there for all to see, but ultimately it is this body's decision on which route to go, so.
Okay, I'm saying I prefer more information the earlier as possible.
And then also, I would say, yes, tonight, if there is a recommendation that moves forward tonight, it would then move to a city council meeting.
Okay, and I guess when I look at the packet as it went out, there was a two-page chart of numbers scratched out with different categories of rates, and it was indecipherable to anyone, I would think, without all of this additional information. So in the future, the more information, the better, so that people can understand it. Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor by Alderperson Bowring. We have a second by Alderperson Bruno. Any clarification requests regarding the motion? A second. This is on the amendment, ladies and gentlemen.
Can anyone speak from the audience before we vote?
Technically speaking, yes, and if no one objects, I'd be happy to recognize Mr. Burns. No relation, spelled differently? Huh? On the amendment only, Rob, okay?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I had two questions. One of them, I think Alderman Swanson sort of brought up. Rob Burns, 1950, 2000 South Batavia Avenue project called the Preserve of Geneva. So I also would like to, assuming you get to the net metering, I would like to speak on that as well.
Of course.
So we are in the medium general service category. So I read only what was here. I came back from Michigan today to be here. So I could only read what I got. Apparently, you were looking at stuff that I didn't have. So it's a little hard to follow in this meeting, but I can handle it best I can. But one of the things I had a question was the medium general service was not summarized in the Q&A attachment that was under the minutes tab. So I wanted to make sure that the intent was, and if I could verify it, that category is getting the same increase as every other category, or to make sure that's the intention. Because I did my own quick calculation, and I came up with a 19% increase over the next 3.5 years on the energy portion alone. I realize there's a demand portion in our segment, and when you put all that together, you can get a different conclusion. But I'd really like to see those numbers to make sure I know where I stand. And maybe you could comment now.
I can comment for you. The numbers, the energy charge numbers that were presented tonight
Yes.
do not apply to the medium general service. That has a different energy rate proposed on July 3rd that was in that presentation.
Are these numbers that were in the packet? It starts here. I was comparing, here to here.
That appears correct, yes.
Okay, and I get like 19%.
Okay.
In a 3.5-year period, which on the first surface you might think would be alarming. So I am alarmed, but I hope to be explained that you shouldn't be alarmed because.
And Eric, if you have a summary response to that question, I just ask that you kindly share the microphone so that
Yep.
everyone can hear this.
And we can
Absolutely.
pull up
Yeah, we can pull up
we
the
can pull
July
up
3rd.
last
if you'd
week's.
like.
You can just go to the website, it's on the website, and pull it up. Right, but to put it on the screen so everybody can see it. Do you know where you're going, Aaron?
I hope so.
website, transparency,
Yep,
presentations,
I gotta be able to type.
then we're on page 20 of the presentation.
I can't, I'm not gonna be able to get there. There we go.
This is above 25 kilowatt hours? Gotcha. I know. I see, I don't know. No, it's okay. We'll see.
Is it under city council?
It's under presentations. Go all the way to the bottom of the page, government transparency. Bottom of the home page, just all the way to the bottom.
Government transparency,
Got it?
okay?
And then to the right, it should say city presentations. Far right,
City presentations.
and it's the first presentation.
There we go. I don't know how to, I don't know how to share the,
Just escape.
Marissa, come join us. Thank you very much.
yeah. Oh, it's on the second monitor. Gotcha. Yep. Yes.
All right. Thank you. So to answer your question on the.
Summarize the question, Eric, as well, since we had a dramatic break, unlike Alderperson Mayor's dramatic break, but this was equally dramatic.
Absolutely. So I believe the question is what the proposed rate is for medium general service moving forward. Is that correct, generally?
On the packet tonight with the summary questions, where it gives, first page, 2A, three-quarters of the way down. Large general service, 12.91, large industrial, 13.94, large industrial TOD, 13.98, residential, 9.88. It doesn't have my category, as Alderman Swanson mentioned, and a couple others. I'd like some assurance that mine is not 19%, that it's something more reasonable, that ties in with the general idea of, increasing costs fairly across all segments.
Correct. So to answer your question here, if you look at the screen, this is the slide for the medium general service rate as proposed. The percentage increase in revenue for this rate, for the full increase that we are shooting for, is actually 9.17%. And we are proposing a stepped increase. So the first step, which would take into account this coming year, would be 3.01%. Obviously, that changes depending on usage characteristics for your bill. And to your point, I think having some discussion with the electric department on your bill and how this rate change would impact it would be prudent to look at the impacts. Generally speaking, for this rate, we are looking at an increase to the demand charge from $22.82 to $23, which would take in place the very first year. Also, we would go from $50 customer charge to $55 customer charge, and then the energy rate would be stepped accordingly to address the revenue increase for this rate class of 3.01, 6.14, and 9.17.
And if I may, I think that where the confusion lies is that you're compounding the 3 plus the 6 plus the 9.
Oh.
And it's not a compounded percentage increase.
That's overall from the.
That's overall, so the
yeah.
total, when you get to 2028, would have been the 9.17%.
Could I just ask you one quick question?
Of course. Just go ahead. Mr. Burns, if you're going to ask a question, just address it here so everyone can listen and we capture it on film.
So,
Film.
operating with the information that I had, only, I'm just comparing this number to this number. Okay?
Correct.
And that's 3.5 years out from a November start. And that's a 19% change.
For the
In
energy.
the energy charge line.
Correct.
Correct. So So I wanted to make sure that some other calculations are taking place on other lines that would maybe result in 9 or 10 or 12%, not 19%.
Correct.
And you guys are saying, absolutely,
Yes.
but they weren't shown. Okay? So I'm happy with that.
Okay.
And I could talk with Aaron about it further. And I had a second point, if I could, which was the item B on the bottom of this page.
On the Q&A page?
Yes, on the
Okay.
Q&A page. No, pardon me, on the proposed page
Got it.
in the packet that I could see. Power cost adjustment clause. And I wanted, since I didn't know what that was, I wanted to know what it was and how it might impact these other numbers that are creating this kind of an increase, because it seems to say something like your rate can go up higher than that based on what happens in a prior month, based on a bunch of other factors. I'd like to know what it was, and do I already have that in my bill and haven't known about it? And the last question was, I hope to God it has nothing to do with the power adjustment factor that we had 8 or 10 years ago, which Craig, you know, and I talked about that then. So I want to make sure that this has nothing to do with that, and it will never come back. Okay, thank you.
Well, I cannot speak to whether or not it will ever come back, but what I can say is it does have nothing to do with that. The power cost adjustment factor, we calculate that based on this rate study, which says, based on the study, we're buying power in the aggregate at, I think it was somewhere around 7 cents per kilowatt hour. And we look at what was the actual cost of purchasing power in the previous month, if it goes on a monthly basis, in the previous month, and we make an adjustment. So the hope is that it stays consistent, so that power cost adjustment factor is very small. It allows the utility to recover costs if necessary. If we see a rise in costs, it helps protect against that. It also helps customers if it goes down, if the average cost per kilowatt hour goes down, it helps with that as well, because it can be negative as well as positive. Typically, it's a pretty small amount. I can't remember what it's been running at, Aaron, but it's a calculation based on what the actual cost of the city's purchase power is moving forward.
Okay, I accept that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Eric, just to clarify, Mr. Burns's comment, the power cost adjustment, Aaron, still remains.
Correct.
Yes.
So, Mr. Burns, you understand that? I do. Okay, great. I just didn't want, okay.
In the process of this, in the process of this study, the objective is to take that to 0 from wherever it's at, and then it goes from there.
Correct, okay. We have a motion on the floor, we have a second. Is everyone clear on the motion? That was to amend the proposal to include, or excuse me, to the blended energy proposal, also incorporating the $8 monthly service charge. That was offered by Alderperson Bowring, seconded by Alderperson Bruno. Deputy Clerk Fornari, please take the roll. A simple majority makes the amendment pass, and therefore we'll bring it back as amended for consideration.
Bowring?
Aye.
Bruno?
Aye.
Ruby?
Aye.
Kilberg? Aye. Kosarog?
Aye.
Maladra?
Aye.
Marks?
Aye.
Mayor?
Aye.
Patchkey?
Aye.
Swanson?
Aye.
With a vote of 10 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 0 absent, the amendment has been approved. Now to the main motion.
Can I move to adopt the motion as it currently is?
As it has been amended.
As it has been amended, thank you.
Yes, you can.
Oh.
Yeah, what's already on there, forgive me. but
Okay, can I call the question?
Unless
Or
anyone
is
else
there
has
more
questions.
discussion? Not, oh, right, excuse me.
Okay, folks, ready the main motion? Are we set to vote? Everyone's clear? Deputy Clerk Fornari, please take the roll.
Bowring?
Aye.
Bruno?
Aye.
Ruby?
Aye.
Kilberg? Kosarog?
Aye.
Maladra?
Aye.
Marks?
Aye.
Mayor?
Aye.
Patchkey?
Aye.
Swanson?
Aye.
With a vote of 10 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 0 absent, the motion has been adopted at the committee of the whole level, which means it will be advanced to the city council level. This element only. We are going to jump into another topic, yes.
Mayor, is this going to be on just the consent agenda, or since the residents haven't had a chance to see the packet, would we leave it open for questions? Because normally if something goes from.
No, we'll
100%.
keep it off the consent.
Okay,
Absolutely.
that's
But
all.
we're not going to make certain that Should anyone have vacation, business travel, we're going to advance this, likely what, first?
Yeah, August 7th. That's why I was asking. I just,
So we got a
and
week.
normally if something goes unanimous through the.
Correct, yeah, we'll leave it off
Okay,
consent.
thank you, please.
We'll charge you a power cost adjustment for that, but that's not a problem. 2 clicks. Ladies and gentlemen, item B, as in boy, consider draft ordinance restating Title IX Municipal Utilities, Chapter 2 Municipal Electric Service, Article B, Service Rates and Charges, Section 13, Net Metering Policy of the Geneva City Code. Is there a motion to put this on the floor? Alderperson Marks makes the motion. Second. Alderperson Mayor makes the second. Ms. Dawkins. We're just going to defer to the superintendent again? Okay.
Okay. Started. All right. Okay, it started.
Welcome back, sir.
So the next question is, I've lost my control panel.
Marissa, welcome back.
Yeah, I can use the arrow keys. We got it. Okay, so the other item, we had these combined on July 3rd. We separated them because this generated about as much discussion as I figured. I knew we were going to have a lot. So we're going to talk about avoided cost net metering. Real quick, the current code allows for net metering. We do energy only. So that's accounted for in kilowatt hours, whether a credit or a charge. And the key point here is this is calculated and tracked manually. So our utility accounts specialist reads all these meters every month and figures out the energy, whether it's a credit or a charge. What we'd like to do is transition to an avoided cost. That would allow us to credit the energy received on a monthly basis. That credit will be used against the utility billing. It allows us, we can use a calculated avoided cost for transparency. So, we can't be accused of just making a number up. And then we do plan on, if this was to advance, we would calculate that avoided cost on an annual basis. Essentially, it would go into effect May 1 every year. And that would be based on the real-time energy costs at Geneva's delivery point. So why do we want to make these changes? First, we can do the meter calculations within the billing software. So instead of having somebody manually do it on a spreadsheet and then enter numbers into the billing software to make it work, the metering readings would come directly into the New World, and New World could calculate the bill with little or no human input. It also reflects the city's cost of purchasing energy and also our fixed cost recovery, which we just had a lengthy explanation about. The same things kind of apply here. And again, we're seeing industry-wide the transition away from net metering to avoided costs. We have to consider our existing net metering customers. We came up with 7 years. I will freely admit that was somewhat of an arbitrary decision. Most of our neighbors are doing 10 years. Batavia is doing 5. We chose 7 as a compromise to that. We're open to suggestions on that as we talk tonight. We propose new PV installations after September 15th would automatically go on to avoided cost. That way there's roughly 45 days if this were to pass at the next city council meeting. And so people planning their solar installations could adjust to that. Any applications we receive before that cutoff date would go on the old rate. We wouldn't force them to go to the new rate just because their unit is not built and approved. We'll offer the option for existing customers to move to avoided cost if they feel so. They would like to do that. That wouldn't be an issue. And also, if a customer disconnects service, i.e. the house is sold, the new customer would come online as an avoided cost customer. So what is everybody else doing? Naperville currently credits kilowatt hours similar to Geneva. I haven't seen anything that they're considering moving away from that. They also, from my understanding, have a similar issue as we do of tracking that, but that's how they do it. St. Charles and Rochelle have both have adopted an avoided cost, with existing customers remaining on for 10 years. Batavia has, again, adopted avoided cost. They're doing a 5-year transition for existing customers, so they're having a decreasing adder. So every year, the adder goes down annually until after 5 years, everybody's on the same avoided cost. The question was raised last time. It wasn't real clear how we arrived at the avoided cost. We had our previous rate consultant, not Eric. He was busy doing other stuff. So I reached out to Gary Price, and he came up with a model to calculate this avoided cost. He used there's an NREL tool, which is the National Renewable Energy, I don't know what the L stands for. Lab, there you go. There's a website called PV Watts, and you can go on there, you can put your address in, tell it how big of a PV system you're looking to install, and it'll give you the energy output of that system for an entire year. So we use that, and we put it in on an hourly basis, and we match that up to our historical day-ahead LMP, which is our local marginal price, our real-time price for electricity. And that allowed us to give a value based on what the real-time price of electricity was for the output of that solar unit, this hypothetical 25 kW rooftop PV system. Once we had that value, we knew how many kilowatt hours we were going to generate. We knew the value of it. We simply divided the two, and that gave us our avoided cost at the meter. We decided to go with the avoided cost at the meter and not at the LMP, because at the meter, this includes the losses. So we are including the distribution losses in this avoided cost, which is an advantage to the PV customers. They're not having to absorb those losses that the city or the utility incurs. And this is relatively easy and quickly updated. We can go in once a year and download our LMPs, run the model, drop it in a spreadsheet, and we get the adjusted avoided cost. So I don't know if that's a lengthy way of saying it's easier than how I presented it last time. We did have a couple example customers. We had customer one, who's a high-producing PV customer. They typically have a credit on their bill. They typically don't pay anything beyond the $8 customer charge for residential. So in the hypothetical month, they would have a credit of $60.32 that would get applied to their utility bill. The second customer is one we think uses more energy. They have a PV system. They tend to have a bill. So whatever energy that their PV system is putting out, they're actually drawing extra from the grid to keep whatever on as they have in their house. Under the current rate, they would have, in this test month, they would have an $81.42 bill. Under the proposed avoided cost, they would have an $87.46 bill. I was asked, I believe Alderman or Alderperson Swanson asked to see an entire year's worth, what it would look like. So here's what it'll look like. Starting in July of last year to June of this year, you can see the delivered. The delivered would be charged at the regular residential rate, whatever the case may be. And the received would be at the avoided cost. So customer one runs a credit through about November, through the cold and dark and cloudy winter months. They're going to end up with a bill. Their PV system is just simply not putting out enough energy to cover their energy needs. And then again, in May and June, they end up with a credit. And then in the right-hand column, you can see what their current bill would be. So they ran a credit all last year, so they didn't have a bill beyond the $8. Customer two, the high consumption customer, in July, they ended up with $6.43 credit. Other than that, they ended up having to pay. It's interesting that as you get into the winter months, the differences between the current bill and our proposed rate is, cents, 60 cents. February there, it's 35. So, and then they round out the year again at the end of June at a $21 credit. So that's kind of two ends of the spectrum there. So I anticipate discussion here. Kind of the points I would like to discuss is the grandfather time periods. The feedback I got, 7 years, was not very popular. What would the council consider a fair grandfather period for the existing customers so they can recoup their investment? Do we want to do 10 years or do we want to do a date certain? We could do it both ways. We could say January 1, 2030, everybody, for the most part, would have had their system for over 10 years, and so we just transition everybody to avoided cost. We can also consider alternatives to avoided costs. So the one aspect to keep in mind is as the real-time market price changes for the city of Geneva, that avoided cost can change from year to year. And that introduces some uncertainty for people that have a interconnected system. So we could also consider some other alternatives, such as the base energy rate that we use for the PCAF, or some other value. Do we want to consider putting limits on system size? Currently, we do not do that. Other towns and electric utilities do. There's a couple different ways you can go about that. You can just put a 10 kW limit on system size, or you can tie it to previous year's consumption. There's a couple different ways we can look at that. And also I was asked, well, do we have to do this right now, or could we wait and see, is there a limit at which point there's kind of, we get into a situation where we're not covering our fixed costs again, kind of what we talked about at the previous agenda item. So these are all things that I would like the city council to consider. I realize it is getting late. It's almost 9 o'clock. So, I'm definitely open to suggestions on these points.
I doubt anyone has any comments or questions.
Yeah, great. So,
Just vote.
Alderperson Mayor, kick things off. Alderperson Swanson.
I would like to have you go back a couple
Alderperson
slides.
Bruder.
I just have questions first before my comments come.
which slide?
One,
This isn't going to be another thank you very much. I was just thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't have the graphs
no,
on
go
this
one forward.
This one.
It was the part where you said that it would be calculated at the meter instead of at the LMP node. And I was just wondering what you would think the loss for the voltage drop, whatever it is.
About 5%.
5%, okay. So it's a 5% kind of gift to the homeowner. Okay, so then if you go forward to the table,
I'm going the wrong way. That one? That one.
this one, okay. Is this is the avoided cost?
Yes. So the numbers in the green column are the avoided costs. Is the electric charges considering with the avoided costs. The received column is actually the avoided cost energy.
That's what they're getting off their PVs, if we charge it at the same rate.
So that would be all the energy that comes to our net meter.
Okay,
So you've got the PV system that's generating power. That power is used by the residents first. Anything that's left over comes back to us as received power.
oh, I didn't realize that the PVs actually feed into the house as well as onto a meter,
Yes,
reverse meter.
they typically feed to the panel
Mm-hmm.
first, and then
And then
the
out
way
to
electricity
the
works,
grid.
the load is closest there, and so whatever load needs to be fed by the PV is fed first, and then anything left over comes to us as a received energy credit, or received energy, kilowatt
And the
hours.
delivered would be what you have to send there when
Right.
the PV's not not being fully satisfied.
Right, when the load in the
When the
house.
load isn't being fully satisfied
There you
by
go.
the PV,
Yes.
you have to deliver. So then we have the difference there. If you totaled that column of credits, what is that total to, instead of just the zeros of the current bill?
Oh, on the current bill?
So like on an annual basis, that green column, what does it total out to?
I can't do that quickly.
Okay.
I can do that and get that number to
It looks
you,
like a
but-
credit, right?
It's a charge on top of about $250.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so. I guess you're banking, in the current methodology, you're wiping out the bill by banking these credits?
Right,
Is that?
from month to month. It's a really bad analogy, but it's one that works, is they're essentially, we're storing that energy, that excess energy, and then when they need it, we give that back to them.
But that's not the way electricity
That's really not the way
works.
it works.
Okay.
But that's the way the net metering currently is structured right now.
Okay. And then the bottom case is the same thing, but it's for a high energy consumption user.
Correct.
There's no real difference here.
Right.
Okay. So what we're saying is that the user or the PV panel resident gets hurt by the transition to the cost model, the actual cost.
I don't know if I want to,
General?
I don't know if I want to say, I don't know if I want to use the word hurt.
Well, they get
It's a different.
more
it's-
cost.
Right, it's an increase in costs, which is where the grandfathering comes in. Moving forward, if avoided cost is what we have adopted, then is somebody goes to a PV installer or vendor, they can consider those costs in the overall cost of the system.
So, I mean, to balance that out, do you choose on your new installation more panels? Or is there some way to balance that out so that there's still an incentive for residential users to install panels?
Since we don't limit system size, they could put in a larger system.
And then it
But
theoretically might balance
Theoretically,
this
but
out.
there is a capital cost to that, right?
Right,
So
so
there's,
there's then a
they would
spread
have
of
to do
that, or-
they would have to do the math and, figure out what, at what point that they're comfortable based on.
Have we met with any of these solar providers that might serve our area and see if this would put a limitation on their ability to serve Geneva?
I have not, no.
Limitation from a vendor standpoint, is that what you're referring to?
Well, I mean, I know, you get 100 calls a week or a year from people, we want to tell you about solar for your home. And as soon as I say I'm not a ComEd customer, they
Yes.
drop the call, which is fantastic. But in the case of people who actually want to do this, and as Geneva, stewards, we should want there to be solar panels in Geneva. It's a beneficial thing for our community, I think.
Yes,
So removing incentive isn't great in my book in this case, and I would wonder what those vendors might say about this change and how it would impact their ability to serve residences in Geneva.
yeah, I don't have an answer to that.
So that's all for now. I don't have answers for what I think about any of this, really. I would like to kick it down the road a ways until we know more about what the state of affairs is, really.
And this is a question we have struggled with now for a number of years. This has come up before. So we need to figure out how we're going to deal with this moving forward into the future. Because I don't think people are going to stop putting PV systems on their house.
Well, I hope not. I mean, I see them going in around the neighborhood periodically, and I think that's a good sign that, there's going to gain some momentum in that regard. But I'll yield to other people to comment now.
Alderperson Swanson, then Bruno, then Patchke. Then Bowring.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to clarify one of the points that you made as a benefit to doing this was to make it easier to bill. And I think that it still could be easier to bill whether we use the avoided cost or something more commensurate with what they're paying, true net metering. So I just wanted to clarify that that is in fact the case, that we don't have to use the avoided cost to achieve the benefits in billing.
That's correct. I mean, we could assign it whatever value.
Okay, so the avoided cost does not put us in a situation where the billing is easier. So I just wanted to make that clarification because that I think is a big distinction. So we could change the way we bill solar customers and should to make it easier and remove the manual. And the step one could be to do it at the true cost of what they're paying, net metering, if you will. So that could be done soon.
Yes.
Implemented. Okay, so that was point one. A question, what is the dollar impact of these changes? We know we have 31 or 33 solar customers. We know what the net mean. We have the manual pages. What would the dollar impact on an annual basis be?
I don't have that amount.
Okay, can we?
I mean, I could find out.
Okay,
That would be something that we could.
Do you want residential only, Alderperson?
I think everything, but both, I think there are 3 commercial and
Exactly.
31, fine, all of it.
All of it, okay.
I think that would be helpful. We have a $36 million electric budget. What are we talking here? Are we talking 100,000? Are we talking 5,000? I don't know. So, which gets me to my next question. We talk about solar customers not paying their fair share of fixed costs. So I look at, well, we have 31 customers. We came up with $28 as our fixed cost. 31 customers at $28 a month, we're talking $10,500 a year. Is that the dollar amount that we're so concerned about?
It's not the 30 customers that concern me, it's when we have 300 or 400.
Okay, and
That's really what I'm looking for.
I totally get that, and that's where I think, could we have a trigger point where it's causing the system pain? Because we signed on to the Greenest Region Compact in 2017, six years ago, which stipulated we're going to advance renewable energy. We're going to enact policies that support clean energy. And then specifically, it said we're going to adopt codes and permitting practices that support renewable energy systems in the community.
Which we've done.
And this seems like it's going in the opposite direction.
Well,
And-
don't forget, we are a Soul Smart Bronze community.
Understand,
Yeah.
but I'm saying this move, in a way, is saying we want to restrict or reduce the financial benefit of solar to help the system. I get that, but do we need to do that? Are we doing it for $10,500 a year? Or at some point, could it be when we have a market penetration of 4%? So I think that's a distinction that's important. Should we continue to encourage it now, and then when we hit that plateau, we could implement these changes? So that's.
Okay, yeah, we can, it's something we can investigate.
And I think the starting point is, what dollar amounts are we talking about? So if we're on a $36 million budget, if we're talking $20,000, I'm not sure that we're at the point where it's causing us pain. So I'd like to see those numbers. Thank you.
Alderperson Bruno, then Patchke, then Bowring.
Thank you, Mayor. Pardon me. One of my questions was answered already, so I'll just say I find myself sympathetic to Alderperson Swanson's position on this. if we can adjust billing to simplify it, to make it fit into our billing, but not diminish the present incentives, I absolutely understand and believe it's right to, when it becomes untenable, that we would need to adjust it. At this point, I feel, I'm just uncomfortable diminishing incentives for installing solar. Thanks.
Alderperson Patchke.
Thank you. I want to start by saying I absolutely understand the logic and the reason behind this, and it does make sense in that regard. However, as policy, I'm quite opposed to it, and probably not a surprise, I'm a solar customer. The system that we purchased was built based on the current model. So it was built for us to be able to afford financially based on the current model. So even talking about grandfathering us for another 5 years means at the end of those 5 years, this doesn't fit us financially anymore. So to Alderperson Mayer's point, it will impact people adopting solar, because that would price you out of a system that would make it affordable. So I think that needs to be considered. I think, oh my goodness, who made the point? Alderperson Swanson's point about the Greenest Region Initiative compact, sorry. I know you pointed out that in general people are moving in this direction, but I see Geneva as a leader. And I think as a leader, we're at a point where we can make a decision to pause and allow for further adoption of solar because we've admitted that it's not currently hurting us financially. I looked through our household's billing, and on average, we've definitely covered our fixed costs, even though we have a pretty significantly sized system. It's nice when we have, the few months in the summer when we have just the customer charge on our bill, but we do pay big bills in the winter still. So I think that needs to be, the financial impact on people who are purchasing solar systems needs to be considered because there's this perception that only wealthy people purchase solar systems, but the way federal and state incentives have been set up, pretty much anybody can do it if you have the credit and you can finance your system to balance those monthly fees out to be about what you would pay for your electric. So we need to consider that it's not just rich people that have solar systems and we can go ahead and charge more. I think I would agree with Alderperson Swanson that we need a lot more information. We know roughly how many customers we have, but we don't know how many of them are not meeting those fixed costs, even on average. I would guess very few, if any. And so this, in general, just as a policy, doesn't seem to make sense. I know you also mentioned that there's been a decrease in adoption of solar. I think that had a lot to do with the federal and state policies being worked out over the last couple of years. And there are new policies in place now that may see an uptick, and I think that's something that we should want to see. And putting this in place right now very likely could inhibit that, and I don't think that would be good for our community or for the world that, we're building for the future. That's all I had, thanks.
Thank you. Alderperson Bowring.
So I'm going to try to just note when I agree with people that have already spoken to keep this short. I agree with many of the points that have been brought up. I also very much want to take the manual spreadsheet part of this out. I think that for me right now is the highest priority, is so that we have our staff doing something better with their time. But I'd like to see alternatives to this proposed model. I'd like to see more data, I'd like to see more numbers. I'd like to understand the impact of this, as Swanson brought up, and Paschke. As several folks have brought up, I want to see us taking seriously the idea of incentivizing. I sense some concern about what if we go from 30 to 400. I feel like we should be so lucky, and yes, we need to have a plan for when we get there, but in the meantime, I'd love to see us go up that high. If there are other concerns that have not been addressed between 33 and 400 that you want input on or you have concerns about, I would absolutely be open to hearing that. But right now, I guess when I hear we could try to limit the system size, I'm curious, why would we want to limit the system size? Is like what liability are we trying to cover against in doing that? I guess in part, as Alderperson Paschke brought up, Alderperson Swanson also, Alderperson Bruno, I think we have both. I think this is fundamentally a policy issue, and there's a fiscal side to it, and then there is, I don't know, a broader side to it, which is what are we doing in the realm of renewables? And I know that we have a big chunk of our portfolio that addresses that, but I think we need to be moving in all directions all the time at the greatest maximum speed possible. So, yeah, so I would second the request for more information, and yeah, and I think it is prudent for us to seek information, as Alderperson Mayer brought up, from providers to see, well, how would this impact things? I know also from personal experience, we've been interested in solar. You know, the folks that hang out at Costco don't want to talk to us because we don't have ComEd, and that's fine. There's obviously benefits to that also, but it's a different hurdle than for customers. And we have a different setup than ComEd. So there's different challenges, different benefits. But again, I guess I'd like to reiterate, I absolutely want to see us continuing to incentivize solar. That being said, I do not want to make our financial folks keep updating spreadsheets. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Alderperson Paschke for a second time, unless someone who has not yet spoken wishes to do so. Alderperson Paschke.
I just wanted to add that I 100% agree, and I had it in my notes and I skipped it until you said it. I 100% agree that we need to get away from the manual spreadsheet billing. I actually didn't even know that was how it was being done until fairly recently. And yeah, absolutely that needs to be changed as soon as possible. That's the one part of this that I feel like we need to move on as soon as possible.
Alderperson Bruno for a second time, unless someone else who has not yet spoken wishes to do so.
Would it be appropriate to table this to a date or a date certain? As we get more information?
If I could, if it is tabled, I don't know if I want to table it to a date certain, because we have,
Okay.
you know, based on this feedback, which is fantastic, which is exactly what I needed, we've got a lot of work to do. So,
Yeah, we just wouldn't advance it, and then at such time as the electric utility's ready to bring it back, we would bring it back.
Okay,
So there's, I mean, we can just,
So terminology would be advance to a future meeting?
No, I believe the term.
Nothing to advance
Oh.
until they come back with new information.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second on the floor to bring this to discussion. The decision tonight would be, as I understand it, to, I guess, amend the motion to, quote, not advance this to council for consideration until additional information is provided.
could either vote,
Well, you don't have to.
Vote it, I don't want to vote it
Yeah.
down?
well, you could vote it down,
Right.
the way it's presented,
Exactly.
and then it would come back at a later time in a different
Or can you,
fashion.
can
Or
we
you could just
ask the
withdraw-
motion or withdraw?
You could just withdraw the motion, and then we'll bring it back at a later date.
After Alderperson Bowering, and then Alderperson Mayer.
Sorry, I have a quick question for Superintendent Holden. Do you feel that at this time you have enough information that we could productively resolve the spreadsheet part of this? Or is that, do you feel that we need a little bit more input before we get to that stage too? Like, could we mimic net metering using the adjusted cost like, I understand there's software limitations, and that's not my area of expertise, but is there a way to set things up so that our software is doing this for us in the interim at the rate, like at an equivalent rate to net metering, or is that not?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, we could. We just need to decide, or you need to decide what we're going to put on the other side of that equation. Is it going to be the retail rate, or
What would be most equivalent to the net metering that we have now? It would be the retail rate?
be the retail rate, yes?
Okay, then may I amend, sorry, do you mind? Why don't you ask, oh, I don't know.
I have a question that's completely apart from the motion and just informational, so you can.
Okay. Well, can I make the motion then
Yeah, once the motion's made, then
discussion is just on that.
on that?
So, point of,
So I want to put an extra wrinkle into what I'd like to see. So I remember when we were doing the legislative reviews of the way that we buy power and how we could be impacted, and the way that we buy our power, that we buy the 5x8.
5x16.
5x16 power from Prairie State, and that there's no avoiding the kilowatt hours that we've purchased in that package.
the cost per
The
kilowatt?
total amount is flat, and it's only when we go over this that we have to buy off the market, and we don't buy that amount. Is that correct?
Right, so we have several different contracts. We have the Prairie State, we have the NIMPA contract. So NIMPA provides us, we get 35 megawatts an hour, 24-hour days, 365 days a year, whether we use it or not. On top of that is the NextEra contract, that's the 5x16. So that's 5 days a week, 16 hours a day. So that takes care of the daily bumps.
And
And
that's
then
through
anything goes-
2030?
That's through 2030.
Okay.
And if anything goes over that, then that's when we're buying either in the market or we run GGF, so.
So, in thinking about solar, I had always thought that the peak usage would coincide with solar delivery. So your PV panels would offset that peak area, but I've heard that it's actually after the fact that we hit our
Typically,
peak.
correct. Typically, our peaks are 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night, and a fixed PV panel tends to peak at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
And it's not producing much of anything at 5
Well,
o'clock at
it's
night?
producing power, but it's not producing its maximum output because of the angle of the sun and so on and so forth, so.
So it's some offset to our peak?
It could be.
Okay. I guess in thinking about this and whether or not it's really the retail rate that the retail rate is the blended rate of the whole, of everything that we pay divided by the kilowatt hours, correct?
Roughly, yes.
Okay. And we're not in danger of falling below the 35 kilowatt plus the NextEra contract?
Megawatts. I think I used the wrong term, I apologize. For the most part, no. There are times of the year that we fall below that, and we sell that energy out on the
Sell it
market.
back.
Whether we make it a profit or a loss, we don't know until it's
So it
actually
doesn't,
sold.
because you can sell it back on the market, it doesn't make much difference. And all that I'm asking about is probably not as material as I think it is.
Our base load is typically 35 megawatts or greater, so we don't get into those situations.
We'd have
except-
to have a lot of solar to
Yes.
offset that. Okay. Then I guess I'm
We
in
would have to have a lot
favor.
of solar during the day, because at night, obviously, we don't have solar. But
Okay, right. So I guess I'm in favor of just one rate being allocated and then charged across so that you don't have to use spreadsheets anymore. I think that makes a lot of sense, and we'd still have an incentive to do it.
Director Cruz, this is,
I have better clarification. So if we do that, that would also eliminate the May 1st removal of all the credit. That section of the code would go away. So what's really going to happen is every month, you're going to have what you delivered, what you received, it's going to net out, and you're going to pay for it or not pay for it, no matter what. That's the only way for us to get rid of the spreadsheets. Does that make
So
sense?
there's no carry forward,
There's no carry forward, no carry
month
back.
to month even?
You'll get a
Nope.
credit for the next
You'll
month.
get credit paid out
Right.
on that bill.
Oh.
So if you give more back to the system, you're gonna get a credit
For the next month.
Well,
on that,
on
no,
the
on that
count.
bill.
But you have a credit balance.
Yes. But it'll go against the water as well, but that's an accounting thing, and don't worry about that part.
If you're at a negative balance.
Bob, your microphone's not on, so that's okay.
But if you're at a negative balance at the end of the fiscal year, that would be zeroed out.
No, to get rid of the spreadsheets, that also has to go away.
Okay.
It's basically a rolling number. Delivered minus received, whatever happens, you're gonna pay or you're gonna get the credit, and that is gonna be it.
But huge benefits to your staff.
Yes, we don't have to do 36 spreadsheets every single month. And then hope that there's not an error in one single number in one spreadsheet that will make the billing wrong, or possibly in future, to go back and rebill.
So that all makes sense to me. I think we
Okay.
should make the motion to do that.
Okay, but so now I feel like I'm confused again.
Hold on, you've concluded your point of
Yeah, my questions are mostly resolved in my head, I think.
not yet action, so that Alderperson Bruno, again, we have an option to consider this matter, vote it down. The preferred option, I think, would be to withdraw the motion in second, but before we do any sort of thing,
That's, this is more of the point of order. If it is this committee's intent to defer this, amending what's here now is rather moot. So it would seem just withdraw the initial motions. We revisit this with this input.
then we would bring a draft of just, in essence, item 2B back for further consideration with some additional information that your team has promised to provide, and hopefully direction that you've received this evening. Does that make
Correct.
sense?
We could bring the change in net metering billing to the residential rate, right? So that would mimic the way we're doing it now. I could bring that back relatively quickly. The other changes is going to take a little bit more time.
Well, yeah, it'll be a mid-August kind of thing, at least, at the earliest.
Yes.
I'm sure, so that's August of 2028. So it's, everyone's comfortable? Alderperson Kosarog?
I think we're all saying the same thing, but I just
Yeah.
would like to say, I'd like to just put it off. No motions, no policymaking tonight.
I'll ask the motioner then to withdraw the motion, the seconder concurs?
Yes.
Okay, Alderperson Marks made the motion. Do you wish to withdraw?
I'll withdraw the motion.
Alderperson Mayor made the second. Do you wish to withdraw?
Yes.
That's it? No drama or anything? There's no action taken. It's been withdrawn.
Withdrew.
Withdrawn, forgive me. Yes, I am, as mayor. Now, on the decision to annex St. Charles, are we going to continue with that tonight, or are we going to? Public comment, ladies and gentlemen, anyone with us tonight? Any information you'd like to share with the council?
My points were covered.
Thank you, good to see you, Mr. Burns. Mr. Gale?
Did a good job tonight.
Oh,
Came here to make you wait a month.
from you.
Customer, too.
Capture that moment on film, as it were. Or 8mm hit. From the council, or excuse me, committee, any new business to share with the community or each other? If not, I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session on the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body pursuant to 5 Illinois compiled statutes, 120, Section 2, C5. Alderperson Bowering with the motion, Alderperson Kosarog with the second. All in favor of? Will require a roll call. Thank you. Like you haven't been here trying to, okay, was it Jean, is it?
Bowering?
Aye.
Bruno?
Aye.
Ruby?
Aye.
Gilbert?
Aye.
Kosarog?
Aye.
Maladra?
Aye.
Marks?
Aye.
Mayor?
Aye.
Patchke?
Aye.
Swanson?
Aye.
To go into closed session has been approved. We will do so momentarily. The microphones are off. And I should announce there'll be no action taken this evening, ladies and gentlemen.